segi bara góðan dag og velkomin á þessa Örráðstefnu hjá okkur í dag. Þetta 10. viðburðurinn í fundaröð heilsueflingu á vinnustöðum og hluti af samstarfsverkefni embættis landlæknis, VIRK og Vinnueftirlitsins. Ég heiti Lofsdóttir og ég sviðsstjóri hjá VIRK og ég ætla að vera fundarstjóri hér í dag og gaman að sjá okkur öll og líka velkomin líka þeir sem í streymi. Viðburðurinn líka streymt. Og það sérstök ánægja fyrir okkur í dag að kynna hér Streitustiga sem afurð Marie Kingston sem með okkur hér í dag og kemur frá Danmörku. En Streitustigin verkfæri sem við höfum verið með á forvarnasíðu VIRK, velvirk.is, núna í þó nokkuð tíma. Fengur leyfi hjá Marie og hennar samfélagsfélaga til að nýta Streitustigann. Og við höfum fengið mikið af fyrirspurnum og haldið kynningar Streitustigann. Og svo settum við okkur bara aftur í samband við Marie og ákváðum að það væri gaman að fá hana bara til Íslands. Og auðvitað eins og alla aðra þá langaði hann að koma til Íslands. Þannig að við þorðum ekki annað á COVID-tímum þegar við vorum að skipuleggja að spyrja hvort hún vildi vera á fjarfundi. Nei, ég ætla að koma. Og hún sem sagt komin til okkar, við erum mjög ánægð með það. En það gaman að segja frá því áður en við byrjum að það að bætast við efni, bætast við verkfæri sem tengja Streitustiganum á velvirksíðun okkar í gær og bara seinna í dag þá mun koma inn nýtt myndband sem við fengum að nota frá Marie sem sem kynning á Streitustiganum og sýnir hvernig hægt að nota og fer í gegnum öll þrepin. Og það eru 2 sálfræðingar hjá VIRK, Berglind Stefánsdóttir og Guðrún Rakel Eiríksdóttir sem tóku að sér að vera á því myndbandi. Og við erum allavega mjög ánægð með útkomuna, það verður bara gaman ef við myndum kíkja seinna í dag og síðastalega á morgun þá ætti þetta að vera komið. Gætu lent í tæknilegum örðugleikum, rétt eins og við lentum í með skráninguna á þennan viðburð og mér langar að biðjast afsökunar þeir sem hafa lent í einhverjum vandræðum, en við þurftum í miðju kafa að færa skráninguna þannig að hoppa á milli vefs við VIRK og Vinnueftirlitsins sem alltaf frábært í svona samstarfi stofnana. Og ég veit að það lokaðist fyrir skráningu í gær sem átti ekki að gerast, en það eru ennþá laus pláss á vinnustofuna eftir hádegi, það þurfti ekki að skrá sig núna á Örráðstefnuna, en eftir hádegi þá erum við vinnustofu frá 1 til 4 og það eru ennþá laus pláss og það kannski bara best þeir sem hafið áhuga að koma, þá mætið þið bara klukkan 1 og við byrjum bara fundina á því að sýna ykkur hvernig best að skrá sig, svo enginn lendir nú í vandræði. Þannig að endilega hvet ykkur til að skoða það. Já, svo vil ég vekja athygli á því að það að kaupa hádegisverð á hótelinu fyrir þá sem ætla að koma á vinnustofuna eftir hádegi eða þá bara þá sem langar að staldra við og fá sér hádegisverð. Og það eiga annaðhvort að vera komin blöð á borðinu eða þau koma þá rétt strax þar sem þið getið skráð nafnið ykkar í hádegisverð. Og ef þið hefur ekki lent blað á borði hjá okkur og þá hægt að kíkja á næsta borð og sjá hvað það sé blað þar. En við munum safna saman blöðunum á eftir til að láta hóteli vita hvað verða margir. Þannig að takk fyrir það. En þá komið að fyrsta fyrirlesaranum hér í dag. Það hún Ingaberg Gísladóttir. Hún verkefnastjóri hjá embætti landlæknis og hún ætlar að fara yfir stöðuna á heilsueflandi vinnustaðverkefninu í dag. Við byrjum alltaf morgunfundina okkar á því. Gjörðu svo vel, Inga. Og nú að sjá hvort að tæknimálin virka hjá okkur. Já, þú ættir að vera hér. Já, þetta virðist vera komið sýnist mér.
Takk fyrir þetta, Ingibjörg, og góðan daginn allsumul. Virkilega gaman að vera með ykkur í dag og vera loksins komin á sama stað á sama tíma og ánægjulegt líka að geta streymt þessum viðburði þannig að fólk sem hefur ekki tækifæri til að koma á staðinn getur fylgst með í streymi. Ég heiti Ingaberg Gísladóttir og verkefnastjóri hjá embætti landlæknis, verkefnastjóri heilsueflandi vinnustaðar þar meðal annars. Og ég ætla að fara aðeins yfir bara örstutta kynningu á verkefninu og hvernig staðan núna varðandi heilsueflandi vinnustað. byrja bara á að fara aðeins yfir þessa áhrifaþætti heilbrigðis og vellíðunar. Og innst í þessum regnboga eru þessir þættir í fari einstaklingsins sem við vitum að hefur áhrif á heilsu og vellíðan fólks. Og svo eftir því sem að lögin bætast ofan á, það færist við lengra frá og þessir þættir í umhverfi einstaklingsins. Þið sjáu þarna í rauða boganum, þessar aðstæður í lífi, leik og starfi og þar náttúrulega kemur vinnan mjög sterkt inn. Vinna mjög stór þáttur, atvinna mjög stór þáttur í lífi fólks og það skiptir mjög miklu máli að huga að hvernig getur vinnustaður og hvernig getur við gert vinnuna þannig að hún styðji við góða heilsu og vellíðan starfsfólks. Og smá yfirlit hérna yfir starfið okkar hjá embætti landlæknis, markvisst samstarf vellíðan fyrir alla. Við erum með nokkrar svona heilsueflandi nálganir. Það eru heilsueflandi leikskóli, grunnskóli og framhaldsskóli. Svo erum við með heilsueflandi vinnustað sem samstarfsverkefni sem ég kem hérna aðeins betur inn á eftir. Heilsuefling eldri borgara og allt fer þetta saman undir heilsueflandi samfélag. Þannig að við viljum helst ná til allra í gegnum þessar heilsueflandi nálganir okkar. En já, heilsueflandi vinnustaður sem við erum sérstaklega að fókusa á í dag samstarfsverkefni hjá okkur á vegum embættis landlæknis, VIRK og Vinnueftirlitsins. Og þetta hefur verið farsælt samstarf undanfarin ár og gengið mjög vel og byggir fyrst og fremst á þessu verkfæri sem heilsueflandi vinnustaður sem verkfæri sem allir vinnustaðir geta nýtt sér. Og þetta fyrst og fremst þetta vefsvæði þar sem búið að taka saman gátlista og viðmið heilsueflingu og vellíðan starfsfólks á vinnustað. Þannig að þarna búið að taka saman svona helstu þætti sem að skipta máli hvað varðar heilsueflingu og vellíðan starfsfólks og þetta byggir á heildrænni nálgun og vísindalegum grunni. Og þarna eru svona þær áherslur og þau þættir sem eru þekktir að hafi áhrif á lifnaðarhætti, heilsu og vellíðan. Og rannsóknir hafa sýnt að til þess að heilsuefling á vinnustað heppnist vel, þá skiptir mjög miklu máli bæði að það sé sterkur stuðningur frá stjórnendum, að stjórnendur setji fókusinn þarna, velja að setja orku og tíma og fjármagn í heilsueflingu starfsfólks. En það skiptir líka mjög miklu máli að hafa stýrihópa, að starfsfólki sé að taka þátt, að starfsfólki sé að gera það svolítið að sínu. Þannig að það mjög mikilvægt að þessi samstarfsverkefni starfsfólks og stjórnenda á vinnustöðum til þetta gangi vel. En aðeins varðandi stöðuna á verkefninu í dag, heilsueflandi vinnustað. Árunum 2019 til 2021 þá voru 10 vinnustaðir valdir til að prófa þessi viðmið fyrir heilsueflandi vinnustað, gátlistana okkar og þetta vefkerfi sem við erum með. Og starfsfólk á þessum vinnustöðum hjálpaði líka til við að þróa til þess að við getum gert verkfærið sem allra best og svo að það nýtist sem best vinnustöðum. Og þetta voru fjölbreyttir vinnustaðir, bæði minni og stærri vinnustaðir og bæði opinberar stofnanir og einkafyrirtæki, að því við viljum gjarnan að þetta verkfæri geti nýst öllum, bæði stórum og litlum vinnustöðum með fáa eða mjög marga starfsmenn. Og svo var það í október í fyrra að við opnum verkfærið, vefsvæði heilsueflandi vinnustaðar fyrir alla vinnustaði. Það geta allir vinnustaðir skráð sig inn á svona lokað svæði vinnustaðarins og þannig haldið utanum og fylgst með heilsueflingu. Og þessu hefur verið mjög vel tekið og gengið mjög vel. Það eru yfir 100 vinnustaðir sem hafa skráð sig sem heilsueflandi vinnustaðir nú þegar. Og þetta eru vinnustaðir á ýmsum stærðum og gerðum og það stendur yfir líka undirbúningsvinna víða og bæði einmitt hjá stórum og litlu vinnustöðum og það eru meðal annars svona þessi stærstu vinnustaðir eins og Landspítalinn og líka stór sveitafélög Reykjavíkurborg og Hafnarfjarðarbær og fleiri sem eru að skoða hvernig þetta innleiða þetta inn á starfsstöðvarnar sínar. Þannig að það ánægjulegt að segja hversu mikill áhugi fyrir þessu og líka bara hversu vel hefur verið tekið á þeim vinnustöðum sem þetta búið að innleiða sem heilsueflandi vinnustað. En af hverju þetta mikilvægt? Við verjum flest að minnsta kosti 225 dögum ársins í vinnunni. Og það mjög mikilvægt að okkur líði vel í vinnunni og að nýta vinnuvettvanginn, vinnustaðinn og vinnutímann og tengja það við heilsueflingu almennt. Og það hægt að gera með svo ótal mörgum leiðum. Og vinna í grunninn góð fyrir andlega og líkamlega heilsu. En svo það þetta neikvætt vinnuumhverfi getur leitt til líkamlegs og andlegs heilsufarsvanda og brotthvarfs á vinnumarkaði. Og við erum náttúrulega sérstaklega að fókusa svolítið á streituna í dag og hvernig bæði við sem einstaklingar og vinnustaðir getum hugað að þessu. Við fáum að heyra meira hjá Marie varðandi Streitustigans og verður spennandi að sjá bæði í erindinu hennar eftir og í vinnustofunni eftir hádegin. En eru 8 gátlistar heilsueflandi vinnustaðar og undir hverjum og einum gátlista eru fjölmörg viðmið, sumum af þeim einnig skipt í svona undirkafla og ég hef alls ekki tíma til þess að segja ykkur mjög náið frá mjög svona ítarlega frá hverjum gátlista fyrir sig, en ég ætla að reyna að renna örstutt yfir svona hvað hver gátlisti inniheldur. Í gátlistanum umhverfi þá til dæmis verið að skoða hvort það sé áhersla á flokkunarrusli, kolefnisjöfnun, hvort það sé hugað umhverfismálum við innkaup á vinnustaðnum, vistvænar samgöngur og fleira. Stjórnunarhættir, þar svona verið að skoða hversu mikið til dæmis mikill stuðningur stjórnenda við heilsueflingu á vinnustaðnum en líka svona samskipti stjórnenda og starfsfólks almennt varðandi stjórnunarhætti. Starfshættir, þar til dæmis komið inn á jafnvægi milli vinnu og einkalífs, það komið inn á hvernig við skipuleggjum fundi, hvernig við skipuleggjum tölvupósta og samskipti, hvernig verkferlar innan vinnustaðar og hvernig við getum látið þessa þætti ríma við heilsueflingu. Vellíðan, þá fókusin á þetta bara samskipti, stuðning við starfsfólk þegar það lendir í til dæmis áföllum eða veikindum, hvernig fólk upplifir til dæmis traust á vinnustaðnum og sjálfræði, hvernig við líðum með að tjá sig og svo framvegis. Hreyfing og útivera, hvernig við getum haft vinnustaðinn þannig að það sé einfalt fyrir starfsfólk og aðgengilegt að stunda hreyfingu í tengslu við vinnutíma, hvernig við getum gert aðbúnað á vinnustað þannig að hann hvetji til góðrar hreyfingar fyrir starfsfólk, hvernig við getum hugað að stoðkerfi og fleira. Áfengi og vímuefni, tóbakar áreittir, þarna náttúrulega bara áherslan á að þetta sé áfengis- og vímuefnalaus vinnustaður og alls konar viðmið í tengslu við það sem einmitt mikilvægt að skoða og mikilvægt líka að nota þetta verkfæri til að skoða eins menninguna á vinnustaðnum. Vinnuumhverfi, þar til dæmis bara hvernig loftgæði á vinnustaðnum, birta, hitastig, hljóð, hvort það sé hægt að breyta vinnustellingar og huga að einmitt stoðkerfi og fleira. Hollt mataræði, þarna til dæmis fókusin á bara að það sé starfsfólki bjóðist að fá holla máltíðir á vinnustaðnum, að það sé huga að hollustu við innkaup, að það sé tekið tillit til sérþarfa og ofnæmis og slíkt í mataræði fyrir starfsfólk. Þannig að þið sjáu þetta gríðarlega yfirgripsmikið af upplýsingum sem fara þarna inn í gátlistana og mjög margt sem komið inn á í gátlistanu sem mikilvægt fyrir vinnustaði að huga að. En þetta samt ekki þannig að við séum bara búin að taka saman fjölmörg atriði og ætlum að færa vinnustöðunum lista verkefni sem við þurfum að breyta og bæta og laga. Þetta ekki síst líka verkfæri fyrir vinnustaði til þess að skoða og sjá með svona einföldum hætti hvað verið að gera vel á vinnustaðnum. Því það langt flestir vinnustaðar að huga að heilsueflingu og veljan starfsfólks á einn eða annan hátt. Og þá geta gátlistarnir líka nýst vel til þess að sjá hvar stöndum við vel, hvar erum við að gera vel og hvernig getum við viðhaldið því. En líka þetta til að sjá hvar tækifæri til vaxtar, hvað getum við gert breytingar til þess að vinnustaðurinn hugi enn betur að þessum þáttum. Og vefsvæði getur líka nýst mjög vel til að halda utan þróun og heilsueflingu á vinnustaðnum til að geta séð breytingar yfir tíma. Þannig að í fyrsta sinn sem þessum gátlistum svarað þá dregin svokölluð grunnlína inn í kerfinu og svo þegar það endurskoðað búið kannski að ráðast í einhverjar breytingar og svo eru málin endurskoðuð og breytt inn í kerfinu og þá hægt að skoða hvernig hefur okkur áunnist og svo framvegis. Þannig að þetta getur líka nýst sem svona ákveðið aðhald eða eftirfylgni í þessum málum á vinnustaðnum. Og hérna sést til dæmis hvernig hægt að bera saman, þetta ekki myndur frá raunverulegum vinnustað, heldur svona tilbúnum vinnustað þar sem til þess að sýna dæmi hvernig hægt að skoða breytingu yfir tíma. Þarna eru gátlistarnir 8 og bláa línan svokölluð grunnlína. Svona var viðmiðunum svarað í fyrsta sinn sem var svarað á þessum vinnustað og skalinn semst frá 0 til 100 og svo græna línan núverandi staða og þið sjáu að til dæmis í gátlistanum hollt mataræði þá hefur orðið breyting í jákvæða átt, í vinnuumhverfi hefur orðið breyting í neikvæða átt. Þannig að það getur auðvitað alltaf komið eitthvað sem veldur því að við þurfum að fara eitt skref tilbaka en þetta nú bara svona fyrst og fremst til að sýna ykkur möguleikann í kerfinu. Öll viðmið heilsueflandi vinnustaðar eru svo tengd við heimsmarkmiðin þannig að það hægt að nýta kerfið og nýta gátlistana í vinnu í tengslu við heimsmarkmiðin á vinnustöðunum líka. Þannig ég hvet ykkur til að skoða það. Örstutt varðandi ávinning, svona miðað við það sem við höfum skoðað varðandi bara þegar að vinnustaðir setja áherslu og setja fókusinn á heilsueflingu fyrir starfsfólk á vinnustaðnum, þá mjög mikill ávinningur fyrir vinnustaðinn. Þarna til dæmis meiri starfsánægja, sterkari liðsheild, minni líkur á fjarvistum vegna veikinda, slysa og fleira, minni starfsmannavelta. Þetta verður mögulega eftirsóknarverðari vinnustaður og góð ímynd fyrir vinnustaðinn að vera heilsueflandi vinnustaður. Þetta skiptir fólk máli. Aukin framleiðni, aukin sköpunargleði, þannig að það svo sannarlega til mikils að vinna, að setja fókusinn þarna. Og svo ef við skoðum líka bara ávinningin fyrir starfsfólki, fyrir einstaklingana sjálfa, það aukin vellíðan í starfi og meiri starfsánægja, bætt heilsa, andleg og líkamleg líðan og skuldbinding í starfi. Við fáum mögulega hæfari og áhugasamari starfskrafta, jákvæð áhrif á félagsleg tengsl og samskipti á vinnustað. Þetta hefur ekki endilega bara jákvæð áhrif fyrir einstaklingin sjálfan, heldur líka fyrir umhverfið, sem sagt bæði innan og utan vinnustaðar hjá þessum einstakling. Og jafnvel jákvæð áhrif á fjölskyldu og tengingu þar. Þannig að það aldeilis til mikils að vinna að setja fókusinn á heilsueflingu. Aðeins varðandi áherslur framundan hjá okkur varðandi heilsueflingu og vinnustöðum, eins og ég sagði þá eru fjölmargir vinnustaðir að skoða innleiðingu. Það geta allir skráð sig, fara inn á heilsueflandi.is og búið til aðgang með rafrænum skilríkjum fyrir sinn vinnustað. Þannig að það í rauninni ekki eftir neina að bíða. En svo erum við líka að reyna að þróa og erum að þróa vefsíðu sem við stefnum á að opna í haust, þar sem við munum halda svona enn betur utan upplýsingar fyrir vinnustaði sem að hafa áhuga á að skrá sig til leiks, en líka fyrir þá sem eru nú þegar þátttakendur. Stefnum á að setja inn upplýsingar, myndbönd og leiðbeiningar fyrir vinnustaði og líka nýta þann vettvang til þess að auglýsa viðburði og sem að við erum með á vegum heilsueflandi vinnustaðar. Þannig að það alls konar spennandi framöndan, þannig ég hvet ykkur til að fylgjast með og hlakka til bara að eiga samtalið heilsueflandi vinnustaði við ykkur. Takk fyrir mig.
Kærar þakkir Inga fyrir þessar upplýsingar og ég hvet ykkur bara öll til að fara inn og skrá ykkur á heilsueflandi vinnustað. Aðeins þeir sem voru ekki komin í byrjun kannski og þeir sem eru á staðnum og ekki í streymi, að við minnum á vinnustofu sem verður eftir hádegi, það ennþá laus pláss og það að gera bara mæta. Við hjálpum ykkur bara með skráningu þegar þið mætið og það eru lög á borðunum ef einhver hefur áhuga á að kaupa hádegisverð hjá Grand, það upplýsingar verð og hvað í matinn þar og líka það kostar líka inn á vinnustofuna, það kostar 9.000 krónur inn á vinnustofuna. En þá er komið að aðalfyrirlestra dagsins og ég ætla að skipta glærunum hérna út. Just a second. There's a slight problem, but just a second. Marie Kingston, hún er aðalfyrirlesari okkar inn í dag og ég var aðeins að skipta glærunum út, það er smá vandamál þar en við finnum út úr því. Marie er vinnusálfræðingur og höfundur Streitustigans eins og kom fram hérna fyrir í dag og hún ætlar að leiða okkur allan sannleikann stigann og hvernig við getum nýtt okkur hann. Now, I would like to welcome Marie Kingston. Marie is an authorized psychologist with a master's degree from the University of Copenhagen. She has her own company, Kingston Consulting, and she will tell you a little bit more about herself in her introduction. So please give Marie a big applause.
So that was really interesting because for the past half hour I didn't understand a thing, but it looked really interesting. There were a few things I did recognize. So now we will switch to English, and I hope that's okay with all of you. So thank you for introducing me. Yes.
Yeah, there is a slight problem with switching the slides. That maybe this will work. No, it doesn't come up there. That's what I was trying to.
So maybe one of the technical guys can help us.
Is there a technical guy in the room?
Somebody's coming. So until we get that to work, for me it will be really nice also to get a sense of who you are. So maybe if you could just raise your hands to my questions. So the first question is, how many of you come from the public sector? So how many of you work in the public sector? Okay. Few more. And the private sector? And what about the rest of you, I wonder? Maybe you work in interest committees or something. How many of you work in HR? Work in HR, with HR? Yeah, quite a few. And how many of you are managers, work in management? A few as well. Yeah, very nice. And final question, how many of you know somebody who has been on sick leave due to stress? Okay, have a look around. It's almost everybody. Yeah. So that also tells us something about our topic for today, which is stress, serious stress. This has become something that all of us know something about. Is it working now? No? Because we know somebody who has been on sick leave due to stress. It has become quite a common thing for people to go on sick leave due to, at least in the western part of the world. So this is something we all have attitudes and meaning around because we know something about it. So one of the purposes of today is really to get a shared language around stress because it has become this common part of our language. Yes. Oh, just a few words about myself, just to supplement what Ingebjørg was saying. I've been working as a psychologist for the past 20 plus years. I stopped counting after 20 years, so but something like that. And I've been working in small organizations, medium-sized and very large organizations in positions such as HR business partner, internal consultant, external consultant, manager, VP. So I've tried a different kind of job roles. I've been on sick leave myself due to stress. And I've also had employees in my team who has been on sick leave due to stress. So I've tried it all. I've also worked as an HR consultant with people on sick leave due to stress. So I've seen it from many different perspectives. And for the past 10 years, I've had my own company, Kingston Consulting, where I work primarily with leadership and organizational development. And then I work a lot with stress prevention in organizations, but also stress treatments of managers who are on sick leave due to stress. So I work with that in my clinical practice. So from there I get the very micro perspectives on what goes on in a human being, in a professional human being, when their whole world crashes down and they have to go on sick leave. And then I also work in large organizations with implementation of stress prevention and training managers and HR people in stress prevention. So I get the different perspectives from there. And stress has been a concept that has been around for quite a while. But if we go back, for instance, in the 70s, I was talking to my father, who's 79 now. He's a retired doctor, and he used to work in the world of environmental medicine and work medicine and neurology. And I asked him, what about in the 70s? Did people go on sick leave due to stress? And he said, no, sometimes you would have cases of people who went on sick leave due to a nervous breakdown or weak nerves. But this is something, the stress thing is something that has really grown in the 90s and zeros, and especially over the past 10 years. And I think it's true, maybe it's your experience as well, that it's kind of booming within the past 10 years. We see more and more stress cases, whereas 15 years ago, when I wrote my first book about stress, it was something a little bit more peculiar. Not many people knew somebody who had been on sick leave due to stress. But over those past 15 years, it has really grown. So one of my ambitions today is also that we get a little clearer around what is it we're talking about when we're talking about stress. So for the next hour, what we're going to go through is we're going to start off with talking a little bit about what is the relationship between performance and well-being and stress, because those three concepts are something that is very important to every organization. How do we create a good performance? How do we ensure good well-being? And how do we prevent stress? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll go into the definition and the clarifying what is stress really and what is it that causes stress. And we'll also do an exercise together to get a kind of an overview of what is going on in the organizations that you are representing. And I know every time as a psychologist, when I say we're going to do an exercise, a lot of your heartbeat will start to beat a little faster, but we're not going to do any role play or anything like that. It's an anonymous exercise where you get to use your mobile phone. Yay! Great. Yes, and then we'll go through the steps of stress, how stress develops. And I just saw, where is it? The nice little brochure. It's here in Icelandic. So when we come to that part, if you don't want to look at the English terms, you can look at the brochure instead. And then we'll end up with introducing what is the manager's role on the 5 steps of stress. Maybe we don't have time to go in depth to that, but I'll just introduce it to you. And I think Björk will make the slides available afterwards to people. Or yeah. So you can get the slides afterwards if you want to have them. All right. So let's start off with the core task of the organization. So why is it we have organizations? Maybe that's a really silly question, but when people started to organize themselves in organization, of course, the purpose was to create some kind of performance or some kind of results. So we can say the core task of any organization is to deliver some kind of results. So if I'm working in a kindergarten, the core task of that organization is, of course, to give childcare, but maybe also to educate or train the children to be citizens of society and make them play, etc. So that's a core task around childcare. If I work in a bank, the core task is around financial results, etc. So every organization has a core task that has something to do with the results and the performance that we're driving. And if in an organization or as a manager, we don't deliver those results, of course we are in trouble and stuff will start to happen. So we are being measured upon certain types of goals and targets. Maybe you can recognize that from your own job. Maybe you have like a yearly talk with your manager. So did you reach all your targets? Do you have that kind of thing? Performance interviews or something like that. Yeah, some organizations, not all. So the organization is there to solve a core task, but that is not all the organization is also there to ensure a certain level of well-being and engagement. Maybe it wasn't so important 50 years ago. I don't know if we did any measurements on the well-being and engagement in organizations 50 years ago, but now it's hot topic. I'm sure in your organization there will be yearly engagement surveys or satisfaction surveys or well-being surveys. Am I right? This is something that goes on. So this is something that we do in the modern organization. And why is it we do that? Why is it that well-being is important in an organization today? Anybody who has an idea? I know it can be a little daunting speaking in front of all these people. Yes, they don't know that.
Get better efficiency from the worker. If the worker feels well,
yeah,
he's a better worker.
He's a better worker. So yes, this is something that we strongly believe in. And I guess many of you agree with this gentleman, or you have heard about this before. It's very interesting because when we dive into the research of this, the research hasn't really been able to firmly establish this connection. Isn't that interesting? So we can have people who are thriving, who are happy in the workplace, but they don't really deliver results and performance. And maybe in your imagination or in your experience, you can think of a few people who were like that. I remember once I was part of a team, we had such a good time together, but we were not very productive. So it doesn't necessarily go that way, but we firmly believe it. And all managers and all HR people believe it. And we work from that assumption. We need people to thrive, because we want them to thrive, but also because maybe they become a little bit more productive if they are thriving. So that's really interesting. But what the research is actually showing is that we know the connection goes the other way. So when we ask people from a number of different types of jobs, professional lines, types of work, what is it that makes a really great day at work? What do you think that the answer is? What? Sorry?
Good performance.
Yes. So they answer something in the line of, it was a day where I reached my targets. It was a day where I worked with something meaningful. It was a day where I delivered some kind of meaningful difference to somebody else. It was a day where we hit the spot. So the answers comes in line of performance or delivering something. And maybe if you think about yourself, when do you have a really great day at work? I'm pretty sure there's something to do with your work, also the people around you, but we are actually driven and motivated by working. And I think for me, understanding this as a manager, but also as an HR person, it was like, ta-da-da, it was like a revelation, because then I understood as a manager, it's not just my core task to make sure that everybody is happy, and I spend a lot of time and energy trying to ensure that, and that's difficult, but it was actually to try and establish some, you can say, conditions for people to actually work with something meaningful and be able to perform in the best possible way, because then the well-being will actually follow. Isn't that interesting? I think it's really interesting because it breaks up with a lot of assumptions that we have. So maybe you don't find it interesting, but if we throw a serious stress into this equation, everything is a mess, because serious stress, as I'm sure you know, it will ruin our ability to perform because it plays havoc with our cognitive abilities, our working ability. And serious stress will also play havoc with our well-being, our physical and our mental well-being. So that is why all organizations need to pay interest to this around stress, because not only does it affect the well-being of people, it also affects the performance, and then will affect the well-being again. So does this make sense? Or otherwise, ask questions, raise your hands if there's anything I say that you think is not right. For the cameraman, is it okay that I stand over here? Oh, he's not listening. I was just wondering because people are attending. Is it okay? I stand over there? Good. Yeah. So what are we talking about when we talk about stress? So first of all, being busy is not the same as being stressed. How many of you feel that you have a pretty busy life? All right. Almost everybody, almost everybody. So being busy is something that many of us can identify with. And I think we live in a time where being busy is kind of cool. It's kind of something that we do. What was that Icelandic expression you tried to teach me yesterday? There you have it, yeah. But not all of us are stressed. Not all of us will go on sick leave due to stress. Not all of us will break down from stress. So we need to separate the two. And it's extremely important point I'm making here, because many people actually lead busy lives and they enjoy it and they never see the shadow of stress. So we need to separate the two. Can you suffer from serious stress without being busy? We imagine a situation where that could happen. Yeah, who could that happen to? Person who's not stressed, but who's not busy, but seriously stressed. Who could experience that? Unemployment. It's one of the largest groups in society, at least in Denmark, that are reporting highest level of stress, the unemployed. So there you also have it. Being stressed, being busy, not the same thing. Then we have things such as frustration, dissatisfaction, conflicts. I don't like my job. I'm too clever for this job. I don't like my manager. I think top managements are idiots. Sometimes that is being called stress, but it's not stress. And I see it sometimes when I'm called out as a consultant into teams, usually by an HR person who will tell me there's a lot of stress in this team. They're all complaining about high levels of stress. So my first job is to find where the fire is so we can extinguish the fire. Where is the accident? We need to stop the accident. So I start to interview all the members of the team to find out who is the most serious stress so we can start there. And then I started interviewing and people will say, we are so stressed in this team. This is so serious and management needs to take this serious. And I say, okay, but let's talk about you. What kind of symptoms do you have? Because we need to start with stopping the accident. Oh, but I don't have stress symptoms. But the team is stressed. So I can have a team where everybody is pointing at each other saying there's a lot of stress in this team, but there's no stressed person as such. So what I find here is that stress is something that we call another set of problems. And why do we do that? It's not because these people are devious or anything like that. It's because when I say out loud to an HR person, there's stress here, the HR person will start to act and call in the organizational psychologist to do something. But maybe it's more difficult to approach the HR person and say, we have conflicts in the team, or we don't like the manager, or we're dissatisfied with what we're doing. Can you see this happening in some organizations or some teams? That things are being called stress. And the important thing is that you shouldn't go on sick leave if you're dissatisfied with your job. You shouldn't go on sick leave if you don't like your manager, because the problem will still be there when you return. So it doesn't really cure anything. Then we have other physical mental illnesses that can resemble stress. What could that be? What other conditions could resemble stress, look like stress? Any ideas? Depression. Depression, yes. That's a classic. Some of the same symptoms we see in depression, yes. Heart problems can also be, yes. Menopause, classic, yeah. Lots of the same. And I'm sorry to say it is the female, but also the male menopause, or maybe it's not called the menopause. I don't know. What's it called? It's male. The andropause or something. Yeah. Anything else? Anxiety, some kind of hormonal issues. I had a client, a manager who, I think she had the longest list of symptoms. We sat down to uncover all her symptoms. It was the longest list I've ever done. And I said, you need to go and see your doctor now. And she said, no, I'm not the type who goes to the doctor. I haven't been to the doctor for 10 years. But I convinced her, I said, will you please take this list up to your doctor and ask the doctor to do a full examination. And reluctantly she did. And then she called me a few days later and she said, I went to the doctor, I did the examination, he did a lot of tests, I went back, and she said, just as I was cooking soup in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. I went out, I opened the door, and outside was an ambulance, a doctor, and two medical aides. And they were admitting me to hospital acutely. And the thing was, she was suffering from some kind of imbalance of, I think it was calcium in the bloodstream that was threatening her life. And here she was just thinking with something with stress and she shouldn't talk to the doctor. So we need to be very much aware and rule out that it is stress and it's not something else. And of course, I don't do that as a psychologist. I send people to the medical examination to make sure of that. We have the short-term stress, which we like. It's a good thing. It's the reason why we're all here and the human beings survived during the evolution, because the short-term stress is what's enabled us to act on danger. So when the Stone Age men were encountering bears or tigers or the clansmen, instead of just lying in the grass and looking at the sky, short-term stress response will fire up the body, tension the muscles, sharpen the senses, make the heartbeat faster, the breathing become more shallow, so you become able to act and to fight or to flight. So that's a good thing. We like the short-term stress response. It's not dangerous. It's part of our survival. It's a good thing. And in the modern world, it actually helps us perform. So it's a good thing. But of course, we shouldn't be in that all the time, because then there's a risk of it developing into serious stress. And when I talk about serious stress, I'm talking about, this sounds a little complicated, but what it really is something to do how we perceive what is going on. So it's a perception or perceived long-term imbalance. So serious stress is not something that happens in a week. Usually it's over months it's developing, and it's an imbalance between demands on one side and resources on the other side. And there will have to be a number of specific physical, psychological, mental symptoms before we call it serious stress. So we need to be a little bit more, and the reason why I'm making a point out of this is because, at least in Denmark, we use stress as this word to describe all kinds of things. So people will say, oh, I was in a long line of cars on the motorway and I got so stressed. Or the printer is not working, I have to go to a meeting, I get so stressed. Or my boy was saying at one point when I asked him, where is your raincoat? Because he was going on a trip with his class, and I said, where is the raincoat? Is it in the car? Is it at school? Is it in the hallway? Find your raincoat. And he said, stop stressing me out with the raincoat. So it has become part of our language, and we need to be a little bit more precise. What is it really we are talking about? When my co-author Malene and I, we wrote our first book back in 2007, at that time the research around stress was very much focused about personality traits. So would it be certain personalities who were more in a risk group of developing stress? And why was research interested in that? Of course, if we could narrow down those personality traits, when we recruited people, we could cut them off. I think that was the reason why. But anyway, some of the conclusions back then was we can't really narrow it down to personality traits. Of course we can't, we know that now. So when we look at stress, we need to understand the complexity that goes along with it. That very rarely is there only one reason to people developing stress. It is a response to a complex dynamic where we move between factors in the individual. So the individual in this case is the employee. What could it be in the individual that could be more likely to cause stress? Any ideas on that? What could be the factors in the individual when you look at yourself and your colleagues? Any ideas? Perfectionist could be one. Yeah. What else? Not very good at asking for help. That is another thing. Setting very high expectations towards oneself, and that goes within the workplace, but also outside of the workplace. And I think that is one of the reasons why we quite often see a higher number of women suffering from stress, because Many women have high expectations towards themselves also in their private life. Things need to be very nice, very perfect. So of course there are factors in the individual, but that's just part of the story. We also need to look into the group the individual is part of. We now know there are some factors in the group culture that can really affect the stress level. What could that be? What could be in a group or in a team that could heighten the stress level? What do you think? Competition, yeah, unhealthy competition, yeah. Conflicts, that as well, yeah. Yeah, lack of communication, yeah. Also, if you have a team where they don't have skills that supplement each other. So, for instance, if I was in a team of 5 other psychologists and we were being told to build a space rocket, that would go wrong. So sometimes it's things like that we don't have the right skill sets to work together. Maybe some of you are familiar with the term of psychological safety. This is something that is really huge at the moment in the world of psychological work environment research and the research of stress. So if there's a low level of psychological safety in the team, that will most likely cause stress in some of the team members. Yeah. Psychological safety. Yes. So in a workplace like a factory, we talk about physical safety. So if you are in a factory, you need to wear a hard hat, you need to wear a safety vest, and there's some kind of procedures you need to go through in order to work in this environment. So we could say in the psychological safe environment, we have trust in one another. We feel able to ask for help. We find it okay to show vulnerability and say, I don't know, or I really messed up, or can you help me? Because when we have that kind of psychological safety, then we can focus on our work. So if I'm in a team where there's low psychological safety, I will mistrust the others, and therefore my social brain will start to overproduce a lot of fantasies around what are they up to? Why is she looking at me like that? Why are they talking together, looking at me? What is my manager up to? So we spend a lot of our mental energy trying to take care. So if there's high psychological safety, I can switch that social brain off and focus on my work. So that is why it's very interesting dynamics. Yeah. Then we have the L in the IGLO model, of course, the leader. And I'm sure you all know the leader or the manager can play a tremendous role in whether stress develops or not. What is it the manager could do or not do that could rise the level of stress? Think about managers you've had in the past. Feedback. So not enough feedback or very blunt feedback, yes. What else could the manager do or not do? Micromanagement, another good example, yeah. So a number of things the manager can do or not do that can heighten or lower the level of stress. And this is something we're going to dive much more into in the afternoon. For those of you who stay for the workshop, we'll work more with what the manager can do or not do. Finally, of course, the organization. So do we have an organization with a culture of looking out for people? Do we have HR policies in place? Do we have tools in place? Do we talk about mental well-being, etc., etc.? But also factors such as what kind of structure are we working in? I don't know if any of you are working in a matrix structure. We know that matrix structures, when they work, they can be highly efficient, but when they don't work, there's a heightened level of stress in the employees. Yeah, some of you are nodding, so you recognize this. So structure of the organization, also the line of business. We just had the corona crisis that has affected a large number of businesses. Of course, that can also have an impact. So hopefully you get an image of how complex this is. And for all the stress cases I have handled or been part of, which is more than 200, I think now, for all of them, there has been something going on in all 4 layers of the model. So it is really a complex issue. And of course, the human brain, we like simplicity. We like to say, oh, the reason why we broke down from stress was that, because then it's simple and then we can, but it is very complex and we just need to keep our eyes open towards that. So when we talk about serious stress, as I said before, it is a reaction to a perceived long-term imbalance. So just to explain that, imagine that we've got this set of scales, you know, these scales, right? So on the one hand of the scales, we have the demands. So in every job, there will be some demands put on me as an employee. So a demand could be, you need to deliver these tasks within this time frame, in this environment, with this kind of management. It can also be demands I put upon myself, my own expectations. And there are some demands that we know can be potential risk factors towards stress. But in every job, there will be some demands. In every job, there will also be some resources. So the resources are the positive factors, the things I have available that helps me actually solve my job and to perform. So in every job, we can do this analysis and say, okay, what is going on in my job? What are the potential risk factors I'm dealing with? And what are the positive factors that actually boost my motivation, my well-being, and also helps me perform? So to get an understanding of that, this is where you need to find your mobile phones. So find your mobile phone. Yes, it's working. Excellent. So you go into the web page called menti.com. So menti.com, you can see it at the top of the slide here. Menti.com. And when you enter the web page, they will ask you to put in a code. You can see the code up here. It is 14 11 71 89. So you put in the code, and then you're being asked, so in your organization, which factors do you think can cause stress? So it's an open question. It's fully anonymous. We won't be able to see who has written what. So it's just to get a sense of what is going on. 14 11 71 81. Yeah. Workload, communication, micromanagement, or just management, conflicts, too many ongoing projects, bad management, workload is growing, conflict is growing, time of year, lack of trust, too many projects, workload, understaffing, government, lack of structure, short notice, so these are the short deadlines, business, open spaces, yeah, that's the thing we know can stress some people a lot, when you have to work in open office spaces. Lack of focus, turnover, projects not delivered, lack of trust is growing in the middle, workload is growing, communication, management, micromanagement, understaffing is also growing. And of course, if you are in a workplace where you're understaffed and you're being asked to deliver the same as when you were fully staffed, of course, that becomes a stress factor. Too many projects, so that's also lack of focus or lack of prioritization, we could say. Yeah. And of course, you can't read a thing at the back. But what we'll do is we'll take a screenshot and put it into the slides presentation so you can see there. But what we can see in the middle are the factors that are being mentioned the most time. So we have workload as a number one of them at the moment. Communication, and I guess that can be lack of communication, but it can also be if you have a very negative communication side of the organization. We have management slash micromanagement slash bad management. So there's definitely a theme around the manager or the management of the organization. And that is nothing new. We know that. We used to say that people join companies and they leave managers. So when we join a new job, it's because of the company and the job. And when we leave it, it's usually because of the manager. Conflicts is quite big as well. Lack of communication and communication quite big. And then we have the workload and the understaffing. So that is, of course, dealing with too much work. All right. Thanks a lot. But of course, we should also look at the bright side. So another question. Which factors boost well-being and performance in your organization? Ethics. Flexibility, yeah. Trust, interesting work, healthy environment, good teamwork, good results, interesting projects, autonomy, yeah. Freedom, autonomy, flexibility, yeah. Humor, positivity, interesting assignments, good staffing, colleagues, yeah. Good management, woohoo! So we have that as well, not all bad. Good information flow, good teammates, respect, getting jobs done, yes, we like that. Freedom, good co-workers, teamwork, information, doing good, yeah, so when I deliver something good. The job description, I like that. That's the first time I've seen that up here. Having a job description, yeah. So that's clarity around your role, of course.
Excuse me, I just got a message about the ones that are looking at the streaming.
Yeah.
They don't see the numbers to put in, so if you could maybe repeat the numbers so they can.
The code?
Yeah, the code.
Yes. It is 14, 11, 71, 89.
And they don't see the words coming up, but they will get the screenshot.
They will get the screenshots, yeah. Yes. Good food. That's a nice one as well. So some of you have a nice canteen. That's good. It's right at the bottom of our basic needs that we have good food. Yeah. So what do we see here? We definitely see the trust that I was talking about, the psychological safety. So when we feel trust, we know it's a major driver for engagement, for well-being, for productivity in the organization, for actually also for something as interesting as the rate, the payment rate. There was done some research in the US around this, where they researched into organizations with high levels of trust, what difference were there, and lower sick leave, people stayed on, people were more satisfied, etc., but also they earned more money. They couldn't really explain why. If you're interested in that, it's an article of Harvard Business Review called The Neuroscience of Trust. It's a guy called Zach, Zach, who wrote it. It's a really good, very brief article, and I always give it to managers. So if you are working with managers in your organization, give that article, because trust is such a great driver for well-being, but also for productivity. Then we have a cluster of things that goes around flexibility, freedom, autonomy, and of course we know this is so important to us human beings, that we get the choice to choose ourselves and we get some kind of control. Then we have something about the co-workers, the colleagues, teamwork, good co-workers. We have something about the kind of job I'm doing that is interesting. It's doing something good, yeah. And we have something about communication as well, that's also quite big. All right, thanks a lot for sharing this. We will make sure to put it into the presentation. So let's see if I know how to return. Yes, it worked. So just to give you a few of the factors that we know from the world of stress research that will most likely be on the demand side and most likely be on the resources side. So on the demand side, of course, number one is the unrealistic demands. So if you're put into a job where the job is actually, it's unrealistic that you can deliver this, maybe because you don't have the time or you don't have the skills or the job is too difficult or too complex, of course, that will be a driver of stress. And I think it's the driver of stress that has been around the longest time that we have all known about. And this has also led to the misconception that if you're busy, you will become stressed. But as I said before, it's not the case. The second one is also a quite big one. It's about unclarity. So that is why I like the one with the job description, because if it is unclear to me what is being expected of me, what is the success criteria? What am I being measured upon? When am I a success? When will my manager look at me and say, yes, Marie, you did really good? If I don't know that, what happens? I want to succeed, but I don't know when I'm a success. Then I will build up my own set of expectations. And just to be on the safe side, I will expand them a little bit, just to be on the safe side so I can succeed. So that is why unclarity is such a driver for stress, because if something is unclear, we'll build up our own sets of expectations and we'll expand them. And sometimes they are actually wrong. So we start to work on something that is not really needed or asked for. So I always say when I'm training managers, it's the first thing you can do something about is turn up the clarity, because it will lower the levels of stress and it will actually heighten the level of performance, because now you will have people working on what is actually asked for. So working with clarity, it's not just to say that is the manager's responsibility. It's also the responsibility of the employee, because if something is unclear to me, I need to raise my hand and say it. When my manager says to me, I don't have a manager, that is myself, but just think, if I had a manager, when I had a manager, if my manager would say to me, okay, you need to deliver something about this on Friday, and I didn't know what this was, of course I couldn't succeed. So then I should ask my manager, what is it actually you expect of me? And I know for some it feels like a party killer because we want to be positive and motivated, but we really should ask if something is unclear. Then we have a factor as uncertainty. And what is uncertainty? It is, of course, about changes. It can be minor changes, so changes in my daily work. Maybe it's uncertain what is going to happen. So we see that with people who are working in crisis areas or working in hospitals or stuff like that. If you don't know what's going to happen during the day, some of us thrive on that, but it can actually also be a stress factor. It can also be uncertainty on a much larger scale. So if we have a lot of organizational changes and they happen too fast and we don't have time to implement them, then it can become a driver of stress. And we all dealt with a lot of uncertainty within the past 2 years. Am I right? Some of you think, what is she talking about? It's because you had Corona mind. The Corona, that disturbed everything. So we all had to deal with a lot of uncertainty. And for me, it was a showcase that we can actually do that. I thought at the beginning, or I thought looking back at the beginning, if I had knew at the beginning what was going to happen, then I would have thought, oh, we can't deal with all that. But we did. And organizations found a way, and jobs found a way, and individuals and teams and managers found a way. So I think it really showed that we are quite good at working with changes, but not too much. So if there's too many changes in the organization, it becomes a driver of stress. Then, of course, we have complexity. So I mentioned the matrix organization before. When we made a matrix organization, we invite in complexity. So a complexity doesn't have to be a stress factor, but I must say over the past 5 to 8 years, I have had so many stress cases that was about organizational complexity and employees who are being, you can say, hit by that complexity and unable to actually work and perform because things were so complex. And of course, if there's lack of meaning in my work, lack of direction, I don't know why I'm doing this, what is the purpose of this, that can of course also be a stress case. On the positive side, I'm sure it's not so surprising, but if I have the skills and the experience to conduct my job, it is a kind of a vaccination towards that kind of stress. So being experienced, being a little older is actually a good thing, because then you know a lot of that you can deal with your tasks. Psychological safety, we talked about that before, major driver for stress prevention. Sense of control, sense of influence. These were some of the factors we also saw in your word cloud when you talked about autonomy, freedom, flexibility. So it's that basic drive of us human beings to have a certain level of control and influence over important factors in our life and in our work. Doesn't mean that we need to control everything, but we know in organizations where employees are being invited in to make decisions, usually the levels of well-being and satisfactions are higher. So recognition, what's that about? What is recognition? What is recognition?
The manager sees what you're doing.
Yes. So it's being seen. Recognition is what somebody is paying attention to me. So I come into work and somebody will say, hi, did you have a good weekend? And my manager will maybe pay attention to my work and say, how did it go with that meeting? Or how did you solve that task? Then I feel I'm doing something meaningful and I'm part of something meaningful and people pay attention to me. But if I work in a workplace where nobody looks me in the eye or smiles at me or notices my work, then I become a ghost. And that is very bad for us human beings. We need to feel that we are part of something and be recognized. And of course, you can say the most direct way you can show recognition, that is of course feedback. So feedback is a direct way you can show recognition, good or bad, but show that you actually see people and you pay attention to their work. And the core task and focus, that is about when we apply for a job. If I was a nurse and I was applying for a nurse job in a hospital, say working with children in the child department, then I would feel most happy when I was actually nursing children, because that was the job I applied for. I probably wouldn't feel that happy when I had to do a lot of registration and administration and stuff that was removed from my core task. You can take any job and there will be a core task, there will be something that attracted us to the job. This is what we like, this is where we find meaning. Very few people find meaning in doing administrative stuff unless they are administrators, of course, but the rest of us. And I think being in the world of work for many years, the level of administration and the level of stuff we need to do with those computers has just grown and grown. So a lot of people are actually experiencing this, what we call techno stress, because they have to deal with a lot of stuff in order to work with their core task, and they feel like their core task is just shrinking. Anyone can recognize this?
Yes.
Yes, you know what I'm talking about. All right, so this is interesting because when we know this, are there any of these factors we could do something about? If we wanted to prevent stress, so I'm saying the red stuff is what we know causes stress, the green stuff is what we know can prevent stress. Could we push some buttons? Could we turn something up, turn something down? All of them, yeah. We could do something about all of them. Maybe we can't take them away, but maybe we can boost the positive ones, and maybe we can mitigate the potential negative ones. And who can do this the most? Who has the power in the organization to do something about these things? Myself, me, the team, and the manager, yes. And I actually think the manager is the one who's got the most power to do something about it. Not by him or herself, together with the team, together with the individuals, but the manager is the one who holds the largest key to do something about this. And this is also why when Malene and I, we wrote our last book, it was about how managers can actually work with stress prevention, because the manager can work with the unclarity. The manager can work with the recognition. The manager can do something about all of these together with people. Yeah. Make sense? Good. Yes, so moving on. Get to this. The steps of stress in English, but you have it in the folder if you want to see it in Icelandic. And I was so happy when I saw the steps of stress in Icelandic, because the names of the steps are just so beautiful. I really think. So my co-worker, Malene, she actually said, if she ever was to have 5 children at once, I don't know what you call that, 5 twins, she would call them this. Yes. Anyway, the steps of stress is a model that Malene and I developed all the way back in 2007. And the reason why we wanted to do it, we were both working as organizational psychologists, and there was this growing interest in stress. And what we met when we came into organizations were this very black and white way of talking about stress. So there were like 2 categories. There were the people who had broken down from stress. They were over there. And then there were the rest of us. You could either have broken down from stress or not. So it's very binary. Of course, it's not like that in real life, because you don't jump from here being happy to broken down from stress. So we wanted to create some nuances, also because knowing that serious stress does not happen from one day to another, we wanted to create a map of the landscape that you walk through as you go from a period in your job where you are actually working with a high level of efficiency and a high level of well-being till you suffer from serious stress. So the steps of stress is a way of describing what happens. So going through the steps, the first step is what we call the temperate step. And in the temperate step, we have a good balance, this is why we call it temperate, between the demands and resources we just talked about. So when there is a good balance between the demands being put on me, the resources I feel I have available, this is where I have access to the most developed part of my working brain. I have access to my working memory, my ability to overview complex stuff, to analyze stuff, to make decisions, not just based on gut feeling, but actually based on sound judgment. I have access to my more social skills, my more developed social skills. And of course, when I have access to all of that, this is where I can be a success in my job, because we're all depending on those factors, you could say. So in the temperate step, we are not talking about stress. We are actually talking about pretty high performance and high level of well-being. Because when I'm succeeding, I feel good about myself. My levels of motivation are rising. I feel in control. I feel able to develop new stuff, new ways of working. I can take on board changes. So being in the temperate phase, this is where we usually enjoy our job the most and also perform the best. But it's important to say that being in the temperate phase does not mean that you're just completely happy-go-lucky and whatever management say, you're like, yay! You can be very critical towards stuff in the organization. But usually when we are that in the temperate phase, it's more from a more constructive point of view. So we're able to rationalize and argument why we think this is wrong or this should be changed. It's not to say we're just completely happy, but looking at our job and our performance, this is where it's booming. Anybody in the temperate phase right now? Yes. Great. Right. And the rest of you are thinking, I wonder where I am. We'll come to that. The next step is called the healing phase. So now we take a step down. You can see that the working ability, the efficiency is slightly dropping. Already here we are actually seeing a drop in performance. And this is something that many people don't know. Some organizations, they think, well, a certain level of stress is quite good because then people work harder. Yes, they work harder, but they don't succeed as much because the level of mistakes is growing. So what happens in the heated phase is we feel the beginning pressure. We feel that our work is growing. It's overwhelming us. We can't really overview. We can't really create a structure. So it's just task by task. And the internal steering system that is usually working quite well, the temperate step, is going out of the window. So in the heated phase, this is where we will see the long to-do lists, where we write, do this, call that person, remember that deadline, deliver the dry cleans, remember the birthday, deadline, workshop, and then we will just work task by task, crossing out, because we are unable inside of our head to create a structure and to prioritize. So we just take it task by task. Anybody recognize that? It's also the phase where you don't have a sense of your calendar. In the temperate, quite often we will say, okay, Friday I have that meeting, and then on Monday we have to do that thing, and then next week this is happening. In the heated phase, it's just a blur. It's day by day. So this is where we get these surprises. Oh, tomorrow I need to deliver this. Or oh, I'm going to that meeting now and I haven't prepared. So we take it task by task. Usually there's a high level of impatience, irritability, and this sometimes leads to what I call the VIP syndrome. So when we are in the heated phase, we behave like VIPs, very important persons. I have a very important job to do, and I do important stuff, and I have a lot of important things to do, and my calendar is full of important stuff, but people get in the way. My manager is asking me silly questions. My teammates are so slow. Come on, come on. People are driving slow in the traffic. The children back home, be quiet. That is working. So we have this sense of self-entitlement and also this feeling of, if you could all just please go away, then I could perform. So in the heated phase, we are pointing the frustration outwards. We don't feel stress, we just feel very important and we point it outwards. So how is it to be around a person in the heated phase?
You know, you can have 1 hour the heated and then jump back to the concept, you know, is that normal?
Yeah, you could say so. And I also like to say, of course, this is a model. It is a model. It's like a map of the landscape, so we don't have all the nuances. But I also like to say we do have people who seem like they're in the heated phase, but it's just their personality. So not everything is stress. Some people are just VIPs. Yeah. Oh, in the overheated phase now we actually start to talk about serious stress. So this tendency in the heated phase to turn it outwards, now that movement is changed and we turn it inwards. And we start to reflect upon what is wrong with me. Why is it I have lost my overview? Why is it I'm making these mistakes? Why is it I have this inability to make decisions? Why is it I can't remember? Why is it my co-workers are doing so well and I'm doing so poorly? What is wrong with me? So lots of questions are going on and the attention is drawing inwards. So what we see with people who are in the overheated phase, they start to withdraw a little bit from contact with other people, maybe especially the manager or their teammates, because they are afraid of being found out. What happens if the other people find out that I'm so, 10 minutes left. I'll talk a little faster. Now I'm in the heated phase. Yeah. So the results of the poor prioritization and the mistakes is now affecting the self-esteem and the sense of self-worth because we have a lot of identity connected to our job. And it becomes shameful, but also a lot of doubts about what is going on. And quite often the overheated person does not know it's stress we're talking about, but thinks it's something else. It might be dementia or brain tumor, or people tend to get a lot of physical symptoms here, like stiffness and aches in the muscles, of course, because if you are in the stress response constantly, your whole body is tensed up. So you start to get a lot of physical symptoms as well. And also the most ordinary symptom, the lack of sleep or the sleep disturbances. And as I'm sure you all know, because I'm sure all of you have tried for a period of your life not sleeping a lot, maybe just because you have small children, but you all know what it does to our well-being and also what it does to our ability to think clearly and to make decisions. So once the sleep disturbances starts to set in, things can quickly escalate in the wrong direction. So the overheated phase is a kind of a tipping point, because if we catch people there, it doesn't take a lot to help them back on track. But the dilemma is they're usually quite invisible. They're not the ones who stand out. The heated ones, they stand out. The overheated ones, it's like they are flying under the radar. So that really brings a dilemma to the table. And as a manager, pay attention to the people who start to fly under the radar, who starts to withdraw from contact, who has no eye contact, who looks drawn, tired, pale. I'm not saying it is stress, but sometimes it's actually a sign of them moving down the steps. And when we are in the overheated phase, we actually need help from the outside to get back on track. It's very difficult to do it on our own, because stress also has a lot of impact on our sense of reality, the way we see reality, the way we perceive ourselves in reality. So we need somebody from the outside to help us. The fourth step is what we call the meltdown, and this is where we usually see the sometimes quite dramatic breakdowns from stress. Maybe some of you have witnessed a co-worker or friend or partner, or maybe yourself, breaking down from stress. And it's very dramatic, because what happens here is the person loses control over themselves. So it's like we have this stick, and we have been bending the stick and bending the stick and bending, and then suddenly whoosh, the stick breaks in two. And of course, the repair work is much more difficult here. So once we have the breakdown, the repair work becomes more difficult. This is also why we want to prevent people from breaking down. And this is also why we want to create a language where people can talk about stuff before it becomes too difficult. Yeah. So in the meltdown phase, we see the breakdowns. It can be a physical breakdown. It can also be like a mental breakdown, emotional breakdown. And then finally, the burnt out phase, where we usually find people who are on long-term sick leave due to stress. And what is long-term? I've had cases ranging from a month to, I had a person who was on sick leave for 18 months. It's very long. Trying to return into her job several times, didn't work, went on sick leave again. So sometimes it takes forever, and sometimes people will suffer from long-term consequences of stress for years and years to come, and some will never fully recover, but will actually have their working ability impaired for life. We don't want to go there, so that is why we talk about stress prevention. So you can also say in the model, the further down you go, the smaller the group of people is there. So luckily, not everybody breaks down. Luckily, not everybody has to go on sick leave, but there is a great dark number. I don't know if you say that in English, a dark number, a hidden number of people who are cycling around the heated and the overheated phase and suffering tremendously. And then there's a summer holiday, and they climb up on the seaside, and they feel a little better, and then things start to escalate again. And in the organization, if we could catch those people who could do something about it, then it could have a positive effect on both the performance and the well-being. Is time up now, Inge?
Actually, no, we have 6 minutes.
Excellent. Any questions around the steps of stress? Does it make pretty much sense? Otherwise, you can come and ask me in the lunch break. So the final thing I wanted to show you, and we're not going to go into details with this, but what we have developed is a tool for managers. So once the managers understand the steps of stress, they need to understand, okay, then what do I do? So we have developed this tool called the manager's role, where on each step there are some, you can say, recommendations of what to do as a manager. So once you discover I have an employee who may be in the overheated phase, then what can I do? So the basic principles in this model is the further down the employee is, the more you need to step in and intervene. That makes sense. Because the further down they are in the steps of stress, the more they need help from the outside, and the more they have lost their own control. So the further down, the more I need to step in as a manager. And of course, for many managers, that also poses a dilemma, because they feel they have to overstep like a privacy sphere, and that can be quite difficult. But I always say it's always better to work with a hypothesis, have a dialogue with your employee, try to find out what is going on. Sometimes it's not stress, sometimes it's something else, and then try to support that employee. I once had an employee many years ago, before we ever developed the steps of stress, but he was looking very pale and very frail. He was a young guy, and he was not really delivering. Things were going downhill. And then at the end, we went to a client meeting together, and he actually fell asleep at the client meeting. So that was not a good thing. We came back, and I thought I have to talk to him. And I said, what's going on? I'm seeing these things. I'm stressed. What's going on? And it turned out he was playing poker, online poker all night. So that was the signs I was seeing. Then we had a talk about that doesn't go along with working in an organization like this. Don't fall asleep, client meetings. But it's just to say sometimes it's not stress, something else. But then we have that clarified. Because managers, we need to find the courage to step over and to have a trusting conversation. Yes, I think that is all for me, and maybe there's a minute to close the session before lunch.
Thank you so much, Mary, for a very informative and inspiring lecture. Yeah, I don't think we have much time for questions, and you've been asking people to ask questions in between anyway, so hopefully no one is, burning up with a question. But like you offered, people can come and talk to you, so maybe you can take her up on that. Mary, I really want to thank you for coming here to Iceland, and I really want to urge you og hvet ykkur til að koma á vinnustofuna eftir ef þið hafið tíma. Hún frá klukkan 1 til 4. Það ennþá einhver sæti laus og þá fáið þið ennþá meiri upplýsingar Streitustiga. Og síðan líka bara hvet ykkur til að fara inn á velvirk.is. Þar getið þið séð mikið af upplýsingum Streitustiga og það að koma inn myndband hann þar ekki og það komið verkfæri. Þannig að endilega nýtið ykkur það. Og þið getið líka alltaf sendt okkur spurningar á velvirk síðuna ef þið viljum vita meira. En þið sem hafið skráð ykkur í hádegisverð, að þá gerir ráð fyrir að sé hérna á fyrstu hæðinni og svo verðum við eftir hádegið upp í háteg sem að mér skilst að sé hérna á 4. hæð, ég man aldrei hvað hæð þetta en mér langar bara að þakka ykkur öllum sem eru hér á staðnum og eins ykkur sem eru heima í streyminu eða vinnustaðnum eða hvar sem þið eru stödd fyrir að vera með okkur hérna í dag og bara kæra þakki fyrir áheyrnina og munum svo öll að reyna að halda okkur á svalastiginu, try to stay on the temperate phase, but also try to remember, and I know you agree with me, Mary, that we don't have to be afraid of stress because it's okay to be stressed in between. If we give ourselves some time to load our batteries, hlaða batterinn inn á milli, then it's just fun to go a little bit into the next couple of steps maybe, and then we bounce back again. So, kæra þakkir.